Hello everybody! How you doing? I've had a haircut. Finally. Only a little one though. But I think I look a little bit less scruffy than I did before. Strange times here. My cat died yesterday, bless him. I had to take him to the vet. He was 19 years old, grubby, and his name was Grubby. He wasn't grubby, although by the end he was quite grubby. But yeah, beautiful cat. Best friend. He sat with me really while I was writing all my books, like Midge, his sister, who died earlier this year. So really lucky that I had him for all that time, and absolutely heartbreaking taking a cat to the vets and saying goodbye. Obviously I was a mess, crying my eyes out. But yeah, you do that because you love them so much, and you've had 19 years of love, so obviously they're members of the family, and it's hard saying goodbye. But he's gone on to happier places. Flying around now wherever cats go with his sister, and yeah, so toast to Grub. Love you, baby. And yeah, here we are on to probably the end of the Devil's Engine Hellraisers. We've only got a few chapters left to go, so we will finish that today. I hope you're enjoying it. I've just eaten like a pack of Haribo, so I feel like my saliva glands are just like going into overdrive, so I probably will dribble a little bit while I'm reading this book, but little dribbles never hurt anyone. I'm not going to do a recap because, let's be honest, if you're here at the final episode of Hellraisers, you've probably made it through the rest. This chapter is called, we're in the middle of a massive action scene, and this chapter is called We Should Probably Kill It. Marlowe was airborne again, and he didn't even know how. He managed to raise his hands before he hit the cathedral doors, crashing through them and landing hard on the street. He thought he felt something inside him snap, his ribs suddenly made of molten lead. He rolled to a halt next to a car, looked up to see a cop staring right at him, the man's jaw almost on the floor. "Hi," Marlowe tried to say, but it came out as a groan. The cop was wrestling with his sidearm, tugging it out of the holster, and Marlowe opened his mouth to try to explain himself, to tell him they were fighting on the same side. Then Patrick was there, porting out of thin air. He swiped his arm, and the cop went flying. Patrick grabbed the squad car and hefted it over his head, his fingers gouging holes in the metal like it was made of butter. Marlowe rolled out of the way just as the car came down, crumpling next to him, cratering the asphalt. He scrambled to his feet and bolted past another cop, this one falling back in slow-motion shock, looking like he was sitting on thin air. The pain in his ribs was too great, and he had to stop, time snapping back. There was a grinding crunch of metal as Patrick lobbed the same car across the street. Marlowe raised his arm just in time to deflect it, the impact knocking him back, and by the time he'd recovered, Patrick was gone. "Where'd he go?" Knight said, materialising next to him. She looked exhausted, putting her hands on her knees to catch her breath. "Oh, there he is." Marlowe looked to see a fire truck grating towards them on a wave of sparks. Marlowe threw himself on Knight, pulling them both to the ground as it bounced over their heads, close enough to touch, uprooting trees and signs before slamming into the side of the Banana Republic store. Patrick flashed into sight next to it, relentless, grabbing the truck and spinning it round in a wide, deadly arc. Marlowe tried to move, but he wasn't quick enough, the truck driving into him and catapulting him over the street. He lay there, everything spinning. "Get up, lazy ass!" Truck yelled, barrelling past and grabbing Patrick in a bear hug. Knight was there too, laying into him like he was a speedball in the gym. Patrick grunted and popped away, appearing again in an instant on the opposite sidewalk. He staggered, bracing his arm on the cathedral wall, looking about 3 steps away from death. Then Truck was on him again, launching the fire truck like a spear. Patrick didn't port this time. He just threw himself to the side as the truck hit the cathedral. It was like a wrecking ball. Too much for the burning building, half of St. Patrick's falling into itself like a wave-washed sandcastle. "Don't let him out of your sight," said Truck, his whole body jiggling as he crossed the street. But it was too late, the dust clearing to reveal an empty space where Patrick had been. Marlowe's head snapped left and right as he tried to pinpoint where he'd ported to. There, movement to the side of the cathedral, something creeping out of the smoke. He squinted into the dark. Whatever it wasn't Patrick. It couldn't even be human, could it? The space where its head should have been was just a ragged hole, something grotesque bulging from the stump. "What is that?" said Knight, leaning on him for support. The creature crawled into the street. Excuse me. Mowams. The creature crawled onto the street, a mangled mess of skin and bone that looked as if it had lost a battle with a wood chipper, a blast furnace, and a steamroller all at once. It was shaking, struggling to stay upright on its severed limbs. And something was definitely happening inside it, impossible shapes pressing against the remaining scraps of skin. "I don't know," said Marlowe, trying to swallow his stomach back inside, "but we should probably kill it." The bulge of the creature's neck stump was ballooning outwards, a mass of leathery flesh mottled with dark veins. There were eyes there, a whole bunch of them, as big and as watery as cracked eggs. A hole opened beneath them, a gaping, toothless maw that snatched at the air. It uttered a foghorn groan, so loud and so low that Marlowe didn't so much hear it as feel it in the soles of his feet. "Yeah, we should really kill it," he said, gritting his teeth against the pain. You do it." Something burst out of the creature. It was a fat, jointed limb that had to be 6 or 7 feet long, sliding loose alongside a gout of black blood. At the end of it was a hand that looked half human and half reptile, topped with a mix of stumpy fingers and blade-like claws. Dozens of them. Another followed, tearing out of the jelly of Brianna's demolished ribcage a limb of muscle and sinew. They were expanding impossibly fast, swelling, the skin stretching to accommodate them. The creature's torso was growing too, like something had hatched inside the corpse of the girl. It bulged out, as black and shiny as a tick's shell. It was as big as a horse now, even more limbs sprouting from it. The beast tottered unsteadily, unable to control its bulk, its mouth lolling open, gumming the sky, its eyes straining, bulging. "No, it's okay," said Knight. "You can do it." No, really, it's all yours," Marlowe said. The world burned white, and he threw his hands up against the force of it. Bolts of lightning scorched their way from the cathedral, turning the air to cold fire as they sliced into the beast. Its insect hide crackled and spat, and it reared up on its stunted back limbs. Black hairs, no, spikes, as big as javelins, were erupting from its hide, bristling like a porcupine's. Another burst of electrostatic discharge, forks of lightning slicing through the night. They whip-cracked against the creature's rear end, and it howled, a cannon shot of sound that tore into the air. It broke into a run, the whole street trembling with the force of it. Knight dived to one side as the creature pounded their way. Marlowe threw himself in the other direction, but not quickly enough. The beast's ugly face butting him as it passed. It was like being hit by a subway train, and the world flipped in wild circles until he thumped back down again. It took him a second to work out where he was, the world so dark that he thought the impact might have blinded him. Then he looked up to see a sliver of firelight, and the panic was drenched by a wave of relief. He groaned into a sitting position, noticing that he was inside a shop. He'd been thrown right through the wall. He offered thanks to the engine for keeping him alive. "Please, please, please don't stop now," and pulled himself up. The street was a war zone. The fire from the cathedral was spreading, gushing out like lava. The other side of Fifth Avenue wasn't faring much better. The statue of Atlas crushed, and a massive hole torn into the lobby of the Rockefeller Center's International Building. Truck was running towards it. Pam too. She scanned the street and saw him. "Any chance of you actually helping?" she yelled. He clambered out, brushing dust and rubble from his hair. Further down the street, the cops had formed a perimeter, mobilising fast. There was still no sign of Patrick, but the douchebag had to be around here somewhere. Marlowe broke into a run, then stopped, clamping a hand to his ribs. Something was grinding around in there, and every time he took a breath, he felt like he'd been stabbed. He limped towards Rockefeller Center. "What was that?" he asked Pam. "A worm bag," she replied, rubbing her blackened hands on her pants. "A nasty one. That's what happens when you bring people back from hell." Something exploded inside the building, and a fire alarm was blaring too. Screams fluttered out of the hole in the wall, first one or two, then so many it was like a second alarm ringing out into the night. "Where's Knight?" asked Pam. Marlowe glanced around, shrugged. "I think she's inside," said Chuck. "I think it's gunning for her." Pan swore, taking a deep breath, then climbing through the demolished wall. Marlowe followed her, seeing a ruined lobby, cables sparking and water pipes spraying. There were what looked like torn sacks on the floor, but as they scrabbled over the rubble, Marlowe saw that they were people, trampled into mush against the marble. He put a hand to his mouth, his nose full of the stench of the dead. "There," said Truck, pointing. Not that he needed to. The creature had put a hole in the other side of the lobby, and the wall after that, a tunnel of destruction that cut through to the street on the other side. Marlowe could hear the building above him rumbling in outrage, struggling to stay standing, with its legs cut out from beneath it. There was another noise too, a thundering of giant footsteps, getting louder, closer. Night suddenly streaked into sight. She slowed to a jog and then collapsed onto her knees. She was bleeding heavily from a cut on her head, and she looked so pale she might have been halfway drained. She looked up and saw them. "It's coming," Marlowe guessed, but she didn't have time to finish before a second hole appeared in the far wall, and a tsunami of flesh tumbled through it. The beast seemed to have doubled in size, as big as a subway car, its cavernous mouth vast enough to swallow them all whole. It charged like a rhino, roaring, those fish eyes bulging wildly. I don't know why I did that, sorry. Pan unleashed an arc of lightning that hit it in the neck, but it didn't even seem to notice, lowering its head like a bull and carving a path through the lobby. Truck put his shoulder down and charged, hitting the beast with a bone-jarring crack that deflected it right towards Marlowe. "Oh, he sidestepped at the last second, reaching out and grabbing hold of the first thing he could. It was a fistful of soccer ball-sized eye, and it popped in his grip, warm gunk exploding over his fingers. He was jerked off his feet, and he clung onto the socket, punching at the creature with his other hand, each blow leaving craters in its shell. It roared, trying to shake him off, bursting back out through the front wall of the building. Bricks detonated against Marlowe's face, and he let go, spinning back to earth. It felt like a hand grenade had been set off inside his chest. The thing that had once been Brianna skidded to a halt, its hand claws gouging trenches into Fifth Avenue. It was still expanding, swelling. It turned back to Marlowe and snorted, looked like it was going to charge again. There was a series of pops, and its skin rippled, gunfire tearing into it. Police were moving down the street, dozens of them opening fire. They didn't stand a chance. The beast moved again, its whole body trembling as it threw itself at them. Marlowe watched the first two cops pounded to meet before he turned away, fury igniting inside him. He felt a hand on his shoulder, saw Pam there, a face like grim death. "What the hell do we do?" he said. "I don't know," she replied. "I've never fought anything like this. Damn thing is invincible. I can't even get through to Herc or Ostheim. Something's taken down the comms." "We've got to do something," Marlowe said, hearing the screams of the cops, the sick glee of the beast as it howled into the night. "Yeah," she snapped back. "And what, Marlowe? What do you suggest?" She was looking at him like he was the world's biggest idiot, and he didn't disappoint her, letting his gaze drop to the floor like he might be able to find an answer in the dirt. "Nothing we can do," said Truck. "Just hope it stays distracted long enough for us to get away. Find some help." There was a flash in the middle of the ruined street. Patrick standing there inside a cyclone of dust. He struggled to stay upright, a trickle of vomit leaking between his lips. Then he turned and looked their way. "Brianna!" he yelled weakly. He took a breath. "Brianna! They're over here!" "Oh, not good," said Truck. Patrick called out again, and this time the beast that had once been his twin sister answered with a bellow. The wormbag bouldered down the street, each footstep like a gunshot, that train wreck of a face zeroing in on Marlowe. "Run!" said Pam as it charged towards them. Marlowe didn't need to be told twice, ignoring the pain in his ribs as he turned and sprinted. The world slowed into blissful stillness and silence, but only for a moment. Then he ran out of steam, his system completely drained, plunging him back into the chaos. He stumbled along the side of the building, ducking around the corner onto 50th Street. He barely had time to catch his breath before the wall next to him erupted outwards in a hail of stone and glass, the beast howling past him, shaking pieces of Rockefeller Center from its bulk. There were people here, Marlowe noticed, streaming from the buildings, tourists and staff and late-night workers. The wormbag tore into them like like a fox in a chicken coop, its car-sized paws grinding them into the dirt. It uttered another sound, one that was even more terrifying than its howl, a deep-throated ah, 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 that could only be laughter. It was unbearable. No more. Marlowe sucked in a breath and leaped onto the creature's back, grabbing fistfuls of its flesh to haul himself up. It bucked beneath him like a giant bull, but he clung on, balling his fist and punching through the skin. It was like a bag full of sewage, bursting at his touch, a flood of rancid gunk splashing onto his face, into his mouth. He ignored it, reaching in, grabbing anything he could and wrenching it out. The creature roared, a noise a dragon might have made, loud enough to shatter the windows in the building opposite. It shook itself and Marlowe lost his footing, grabbing onto the wound he'd made, swinging in midair as the creature bucked and twitched. It was too much, though, his fingers slipping out of the mess. He dropped, managing to land on his feet, his arms wheeling to keep himself balanced. Truck appeared, armed with a metal pole from a streetlight. The big guy swung it, the makeshift club cracking into one of the creature's arms. The worm bag recoiled, whimpering, and Truck swung the pole a second time, smacking it hard in the face, again and again, driving it back. There was a blast of light as night streaked up the creature's back, one of the beast's eyeballs erupting in a fountain of pus. She was moving too fast up there for Marlowe to see her, but she was making a mess of its face, more of those eyes popping out, gallons of fluid splashing to the asphalt. It lifted one of its hands to knock her away, but she was too quick, throwing herself to the ground and rolling. The creature towered above her, above all of them, stamping down hard enough to split the street in half. Pam was right. It was indestructible. Truck jabbed the pole into the creature's flank like a spear. He fought to pull it free, but Marlowe stopped him. "No, leave it!" He ran to the sidewalk, grabbed another streetlight and wrenched it out, taking a run up and launching it like a javelin at the creature's torso. It wasn't a straight shot, and the streetlight wasn't exactly sharp, but the force of the throw punched it into the beast's side. It howled like a speared mammoth, tumbling onto its side and writhing there. Marlowe had already pulled another post free and threw this one just as hard, puncturing its throat. "Pan!" he shouted, looking around. Where the hell was she? A blinding flash of light blistered the air, fingers of lightning crackling into the beast. Pan strode out of the side of the demolished Rockefeller Centre, grimacing as she unleashed hell. She must have read Marlowe's mind because she was aiming the attack at the spikes in the creature's skin, millions of volts burning their way through its guts like it was a skewered chicken. The beast shuddered, trembling so hard that its skin was splitting, more of that rancid dark water flooding out. Marlowe hopped onto the sidewalk to avoid it, hearing it gush down the drains. Smoke was billowing from its wounds, great clouds of it boiling into the sky. Pan stumbled, and the stream of lightning cut out. She took a breath, then lifted her hands, firing again. The light was weaker, duller, like she was running out of charge. Marlowe noticed that her shirt was soaked with blood. He had no idea how she was even standing. The worm bag was on its belly, its claws scratching at the ground, at the air, its blind eyes blinking wetly. It uttered a soft, pathetic whine, one that almost made Marlowe feel sorry for it. Not sorry enough, though. He ran to the next streetlight and uprooted it like a tree, a root ball of solid concrete. Then he doubled back, ready to perform the coup de grace, ready to splatter its infernal brain all over 50th Street. No. The worm bag was pushing itself up, grunting with the effort, hauling itself onto its feet. It wrapped a claw around one of the poles in its flesh and wrenched it free, pulling out blackened chunks of organ and muscle. It tore out the other two, then broke into a run, retreating down the street, bulldozing its way through the wall of the Rockefeller Tower. Pan flexed her fingers, but she was too weak, producing nothing but a fistful of sparks. She dropped onto all fours, breathing hard. Marlowe jogged to her side, Truck and Knight arriving at the same time. They were all bleeding from a number of different wounds. Panting, swaying like the whole of New York was a boat, sinking fast. The power of the engine was holding them together, but for how much longer? "What now?" Marlowe asked. "Bitches, too strong," Pan said, her voice the sound of dry leaves kicked down the street. A dozen windows in the tower shattered, dust pouring out of them. People streamed from it, a tide of screams and sobs. "Can't we cancel its contract or something?" Marlowe said. "Get the demons after it." "It's not an engineer," Pan said, spitting out a bitter laugh. "It made no contract. That thing's escaped hell and there's nothing..." Oh. She cocked her head, her eyes scrolling back and forth, thinking hard. She held out a hand and let Marlowe pull her up. Then she leaned over and kissed him on the cheek. Of all the injuries he'd suffered, this was the thing that almost stopped his heart dead. That's it! That's what we need to do! She was grinning. Oh, for a stupid guy, you're a genius. What? Marlowe said, as she set off, limping down the street. I don't get it. What did I say? More crunches from inside the rock, the groan of a sinking ship. Marlowe set off after her, clutching his ribs. What? He repeated. We can kill it, Pan shouted back. We can send that gal right back to hell. And Marlowe almost had time to smile before she added, but one of us will have to go with it. Next chapter. Finish her. Pan was running on fumes. She felt like she was dissolving, like the electrostatic energy she'd been blasting out all night had hollowed her out inside, left her an empty husk. She knew she couldn't go on much longer. The engine could work miracles, but even it had its limits. Much more, and she'd lightning herself right out of existence. But she couldn't stop now. That worm bag would turn the city into a ruin of blood and bone. She limped on, feeling a hand under her arm. Marlowe. The kid looked in a bad way, wincing every time he took a step, but he fought well. There was no denying it. She started to shake him off, then she realised she'd be on the floor if she did. She leaned on him instead, the four of them crossing the street to the rock, following the path of carnage. Anyone got a line to Herc? She said. She tried her radio twice since leaving the cathedral, but it was dead. No sign of Herc, no sign of Ostheim. Everything's down, said Truck. Haven't heard anything since we entered St. Patrick's. Probably the satellite feed. She hoped that was all it was. They'd never lost connection before. If you're listening, Herc, you owe us one hell of a pay rise after tonight, she said, not to mention a retirement party. They reached the gaping wall of the rock. The skyscraper was living up to its name, the tower scratching the heavens. She focused on the hole in the wall, like the mouth of a cave. The lights inside flickered, strobing on and off, revealing bodies plastered to the floor. There was no sign of the Brianna bag, but Pan could hear it, those demonic howls shaking the building to its foundations. What did you mean? Marlowe asked as they clambered over the wreckage. Why does somebody need to go to hell with it? Who? That was a good question, and the answer was inevitable. Me, she thought, and suddenly stopped, looking back into the night, aware that this might be the last time she felt fresh air on her skin, saw the moonlight. Her heart was suddenly a ton weight, slipping loose in her chest, sinking fast. You knew it would happen one day. You play the game, you take the pain. Yeah. She took a long, shuddering breath and carried on, slipping and tripping on the loose stone, on the blood-slicked ground. At one point she lost her footing, her hand plunging into something warm and wet. She snatched it loose, a snarl throbbing in her throat at the horror of it. And for a moment she didn't think she had it in her to get up again. Better to just lie here, listen to the dying night. Then Truck and Marlowe were there, grabbing an arm each and hauling her to her feet. What's the plan, Pan? Truck said. Better let us in on it, just in case next time you fall, you drop right out of life. She opened her mouth to answer, but was cut off by a howl from further up inside the building. The worm bag sounded hurt. Pan thought she could hear something else too, a voice above the storm. The next time she spoke, it was in a whisper. Herc told me once, there's only one thing the demons want more than an owed soul, and that's an escaped one. Something ran out from behind a mound of rubble, a woman covered in blood, her eyes full of madness. One of her arms was missing, the other hand clamped over the gushing wound as she shuffled towards the street. That worm bag got free, Pan went on. Patrick pulled his sister's soul right out of hell, and that pisses the demons off big time. So you're saying we need to get the demons here, said Knight. Show them where to find their missing prisoner. Pan nodded. And therein lies the problem, Truck said, because the only way of getting them here is for one of our contracts to expire, Marlowe said. And Pan could see the understanding blossoming in his expression. Or for one of us to die. Bingo. The ceiling of the lobby had been torn away, a drooping hole that stretched up for what must have been 4 or 5 stories. Dust and debris rained down, and when the worm bag bellowed again, it came from somewhere up there. This time Pan could definitely hear a voice, although it was too soft for her to make out what it was saying. She flexed her fingers, trying to drum up a little more juice. She didn't even know if the plan would work. The demons were pretty single-minded when they came for you. Who's to say they'd even notice that Brianna was there? What was the alternative, though? Let it rampage across Manhattan? And then what? A worm bag like that could take out the whole east coast if it wanted to. How many would die? She couldn't live with that on her conscience, in her soul. Not that it would be her soul for much longer. She kicked her way through the chaos to the stairwell, clattering up to the 3rd floor and peeking out of the door. There was a hole in the ceiling here, and she climbed again, reaching the next level. This time, when she opened the fire door, she could see movement up ahead in the darkness of the tower. She held up her hand, motioning for the others to be quiet. "Do it! I had to!" That voice was up ahead, and she was pretty sure it belonged to Patrick. "They deserved it! We need..." A roar, like the worm bag was answering back. How much of Brianna was still in there, Pan wondered. How much was her, and how much was the festering madness of hell? "I want you to do it, Truck," she said, looking up at the big guy. It took him a moment to understand what she was saying, and he shook his head. No way, Pan. I'm going to take the bullet on this one." "Truck, you couldn't take the bullet because you just tried to eat it," she said, managing half a smile. "Just do it, okay? I'm tired of it all anyway. Crush my head. One punch. I don't want to see it coming." "Pan." She rested her hand on his arm, met his eye, and gently shook her head. "It's okay. I'm ready for this." "Nobody's ready for this," he said. Marlowe reached them, both hands wrapped around his stomach. Even though his asthma had been cancelled, he was still wheezing. "I don't feel so good," he said. "Poor Diddums," Pan spat back. "You want to stay here while I call your mummy?" She didn't wait for an answer, just walked through the door into the shattered remains of an office. The noises were coming from the other side of the space, behind the wall of the elevator shaft. She clenched her fist, feeling the energy building up, bracing herself for another fight. Truck could do the deed now, but she wanted to make sure it was definitely Brianna up ahead. Nothing would suck quite as much as being dragged to hell, then realising the worm bag was nowhere nearby. She eased her way around a desk, hearing Patrick more clearly now. "Be okay. I promise I'll look after you. We can still do this, just..." Something crashed to the ground behind her, and a scream slipped between her lips before she could stop it. She spun, ducking down, seeing Marlowe standing beside a desk, a computer monitor lying in pieces by his feet. "Oh, whoops, that wasn't my fault," he said, his words almost drowned out by a bone-shaking roar from the other side of the room. There was the sound of galloping feet, then the elevator shaft detonated like it had been packed with C4. The worm bag pile-drived through, its mouth the size of a house, its fleshy back dragging against the ceiling, its eyes hanging loose and useless. "Oh, screw this," she heard Truck say, seeing the big guy running at it. He bent low like he was going in for a tackle, slamming into the beast like two trains crunching into each other. They careened into the outside wall together, punching right through it, both of them tumbling into the night. "No!" Pan yelled, running to the edge of the building in time to see them hit the ground. The Brianna thing burst, its rotten guts exploding over Rockefeller Plaza. There was no sign of Truck. "Brianna!" Patrick shuffled around the ruined elevator shaft. He moved like the living dead, limping, bleeding heavily, his eyes still full of lunatic hope. Pan had her hand up, ready to unleash a burst of energy, to fry the asshole for good, but he passed her like she didn't exist, moving to the window. For a second she thought he was going to fall out too, but instead he looked down, the wind snatching at him like it was trying to finish the job. "Brianna!" he was sobbing. "No, no, no!" He spun, jabbing his finger at her. "You did!" Pan flinched against his attack. A burst of electrostatic energy burning from her fingers, whip-cracking against him. Too late. She realised he wasn't attacking, but porting. Half of him already erased, like he was a phantom. The lightning snapped around his ghost-like body, leaving just a coil of smoke where he'd been standing. Something fizzed in the plaza, an echo of her strike, a crackle of lightning down below. Then Patrick screamed, a noise so shrill and so full of pain that Pan had to clamp her hands to her ears. "Oh, come on," yelled Knight, heading back the way they'd come. Pan started to follow, but felt herself scooped up, Marlowe's arms beneath her like he was carrying her over the threshold on their wedding day. He stepped through the window and they dropped, Pan clamping her mouth shut to stop her stomach flying out of her throat. They landed hard, but Marlowe cushioned her, putting her down gently. She braced herself, building up another charge, ready to fight. The worm bag was lumbering to its feet, its sides literally split. tar-coloured organs slopping out of it and splashing on the ground. Truck was underneath, and Pan almost cried with relief when she saw the big guy sit up. Patrick screamed again, and the Brianna thing cocked its butt-ugly head, whining. Pan scanned the plaza. She found Patrick. And even after everything else she'd witnessed tonight, this was the thing that made her double over, that made her empty her stomach over the ground. Patrick's upper body grew from the plaza like a stunted plant, a flagpole protruding from his shoulder. Half of 1 foot stuck out from the stone, twitching. There was no blood. It was like he was fused there, a statue that had come to life. And that's what had happened, she realised. Her strike had thrown off his aim. She'd made him port right into the ground. Patrick's body shook, the horror dripping from his eyes. He opened his mouth and shrieked, somehow the loudest noise Pan had ever heard. She put her hand to her mouth to stop a scream of her own from spilling out. Oh, I didn't do this. I didn't do this. The worm bag lumbered across the plaza, but it wasn't coming for her. She stepped aside to let it... That was the worm bag, not me. She stepped aside to let it through. She stepped aside to let it through, the creature moving towards the screams of its one-time brother. It sniffed him, uttering a low, grief-filled whine. Then it collapsed beside him, dwarfing him, its blind face nuzzling his body. One of its feet, bigger than a car, pawed at Patrick like it was trying to pull him loose. He screamed again, holding on to one of the finger-like digits. The air hammered as a chopper flew across the plaza, the sound of sirens filling up the whole city. Pan ignored it. They had time. They had to see this through. Patrick was dying, and fast, the colour all but drained from his face. He coughed out blood, gargled as he tried to breathe. It made her sick to see him there, pinned like a butterfly. But he deserved it. He was one of the enemy. The thing that had once been his sister lay next to him, panting like a dying horse. He held on to her like a drowning man would hold onto a float, staring at Pan with a look of pure fury. "Last chance," she said. "Just tell us how we can access your engine. Just do the right thing before you die." Patrick spat out a noise that might have been a laugh. His hands dropped to his sides and he seemed to give up, resting his head on the worm bag's paw. "At least I don't have to crush your head," said Truck. He was drenched in worm bag guts, steam rising off him into the night. The relief that hit her, the knowledge that she didn't have to die, was as painful as it was sweet. She could take no joy in this. There was a definite scent in the air over the smoke, the same sulphurous stench as before. She scanned the street, waiting for the demons to pull themselves loose, to come to collect what they were owed. "Please," said Knight, "just tell us and it can all be over." "It's already over," said Patrick, a dry wheeze that Pan could barely hear. His face twisted into something that might have been a grin. "We found your engine." The world stopped spinning. Pan was suddenly drowning in silence. Her heart stuttered, stalling for what felt like an eternity before revving back to life. She lost her balance, only Truck keeping her standing. "Yeah, sure," she said. "Try to..." He paused, coughing up blood. The smell of sulphur was getting stronger, burning up her nostrils. "Try to contact them. You can't, can you?" "What's he talking about?" Knight said. "Oh, he's talking crap," Pan replied. "Not for much longer, though. They're coming for you, Patrick. Can you feel them? Can you smell them?" "I don't care," he said, a tear winding its way down his face, cutting a line into the dirt and the blood. "I did my part. We did. And at least now we get to go together." He stroked Brianna's hand. "We can look after each other." "You did your part," Pan said. "What does that even mean?" He started fitting, shaking so hard that his skin was tearing loose from the ground. There was a ripping sound, his upper body coming free. Beneath was an impossible mix of concrete and flesh, infernally bound. "We only had to get you here," he whispered, "to distract you. The others took care of the rest. They opened the door." "Don't even bother," Pan said. "It's not true, it can't be. Nobody gets into the engine." "Not unless you let them in," said Patrick. "Not unless you open the red door from inside." "What are you talking about?" she said, her fingers a mass of crackling light. Somewhere overhead there was a crunch of rock, dust raining down. She could almost see them, the demons teeming just behind the skin of reality, frantically tearing their way through so they could claim Patrick's soul and reclaim Brianna's. She took a step back. Patrick turned to Marlowe, his eyes slipping in and out of focus. "Thank you," he whispered. "What?" Marlowe stuttered. "Why?" "You ended the war," Patrick said. "You made it happen." Marlowe raised his hands, shaking his head. "I swear, I have no idea what he's going on about. I didn't make anything happen." "Not you," Patrick said, his words barely louder than a breath. "Your friend, Charlie." Pan felt as if time had stopped, everything slowing to a nightmare singularity. "No," said Marlowe. He'd never. It's impossible." "He opened the door," said Patrick. "He let us in." "It's not true," Marlowe said. He wouldn't do that." But Pan could see the uncertainty there, the doubt. She swore, terror rising up inside her like a cold, dark wave. Patrick reached up, spoke into his collar radio. "It's done," he said. "Tell her, please. I want to see the look in her eyes before I go." Her earpiece fizzed. Then a voice she knew all too well. Bullwinkle. "Pan!" He was sobbing. "Oh God, Pan, he let them in, they're all..." A pistol shot, so loud that she had to dig the receiver out of her ringing ear. She called Bully's name, holding the earpiece there, trying to make out what was going on. But there was only static. She looked at Knight, the girl's eyes big and white and laced with horror. Even Truck was scared, the big guy shaking. Pan looked at Marlowe, ready to rip his head off, but the kid seemed about 10 years old, his hands held up defensively. "Here's what's going to happen next," Patrick said, stroking his sister's paw. "They're going to cancel your contracts. Then they're going to come for you. You won't be able to fight them. You'll be defenceless. My mom will pick you up off one by one. Not you, though." He looked at Pam. "You get to keep your contract. I want you to think of Brianna. I want you to think of her for however many hours you have left. I want you to think of her when they come for you." She looked at her watch. 649 hours, 43 minutes, 20 seconds, 18 milliseconds. It couldn't be happening. It could not be happening. More crumbling dust from up the Rockefeller Tower, a faint, distant, demonic scream. The worm bag lifted its head, sniffing the air, uttering another mournful groan. Patrick held his sister tight. "And when they come for you," he whispered, "we'll be waiting." Oh my goodness. 2 chapters left. Let's do it. The next chapter is called In Hell. This couldn't be happening. The Circulus Inferni had found their engine. They'd breached the red door. They were inside. "We'll be waiting," Patrick said again. Then his eyes closed, his hands dropping limply to his sides. The worm bag sniffed him with its giant's face, poured his half-body hard enough to peel him from the stone like a piece of chewing gum. It opened its maw and howled its monstrous grief into the sky. Brianna's howl was met by a shriek from the top of the rock. There was something up there, pulling itself free of the building, a creature made of brick and glass. It was just a shadow against the night, but it was moving fast, scrabbling down the side of the building. The demon opened its mouth and uttered a squeal like sheared metal. "Go!" yelled Knight, vanishing in a streak of light. Pan backed away, seeing a demon claw its way down the front of the building. Another was pushing up from the rubble, this one made of paving slabs and electric cables and pipes. It shook itself like a wet dog, then pounced, landing on the worm bag, laying into it with its claws. The Brianna thing bayed, shaking as it tried to bat the demon away. More demons were appearing, 12 now, 24 maybe, more than she'd ever seen. The plaza was dissolving as they teemed out of the ground, out of the street, out of the buildings. They swarmed towards Brianna, as thick as ants, as they clambered onto her thrashing body. The ground was already getting hot, the flagpoles of the plaza wilting. Pan staggered back, her shoes sticking to the melting stone. She could barely see the worm bag now, lost beneath the demons, so many that their claws and jaws looked like some nightmare machine. Some had spotted Patrick and were spilling off and scuttling over his cooling body. The ground was glowing so hot now that Pan had to look away, like she was staring into the heart of a volcano. She could still hear the twins, though, a pair of voices screaming as they were dragged into the pit. And she had to hold back a cry of her own, thinking it might have been her, thinking it was so close to being her, and knowing that it would be her. There was a sudden roar overhead, a chopper riding into the plaza on a wave of heat and noise. It banked hard, the air splitting as somebody inside started firing a machine gun. The demons burst into dust and dirt, the bullets punching holes in the soft, glowing ground. But it was too late. Most were dropping dead anyway, their job done. They collapsed, just chunks of stone and rock and glass and metal, shrinking into the molten earth. A couple fought back, launching themselves at the helicopter. The pilot panicked, the tail rotor clipping one of the ruined Rockefeller towers. The helicopter bucked clumsily to one side, crunching down onto the street. The rotor churned up the asphalt for a second before tearing free, and the helicopter cartwheeled towards Fifth Avenue, ploughing into a line of cop cars on the corner. Gas was spraying everywhere from the chopper's ruptured fuel line, dangerously close to the inferno. Oh, crap, she thought. Pan bolted, seeing Marlowe up ahead near the end of the street. She followed him, please, almost there when the world turned white. The blast ripped her off her feet. A concussive wave of sound followed, an explosion that threatened to turn every bone in her body to dough. She hit the ground and rolled, everything going dark for a moment. It's over. You're finished. The voice in her head might have been Patrick's, might have been her own. Just die, because otherwise it will be 26 days of waiting for the inevitable. No, she groaned, everything shaking. Somebody grabbed her, strong arms hauling her up. Marlowe, slapping the flames from her back. Oh God, I'm on fire! And leading her away. Come on, Marlowe said. Knight and Truck had somehow made it out of the carnage and were up ahead, waving them on. They passed Radio City onto the Avenue of the Americas together, holding on to each other like children in the woods. Every window in the street had been shattered, and the air was full of clanging alarms. The lights, too, were dead. People still streamed out of the buildings, the handful of cops down here trying to manage the flow in the dark. Pan ran into the stampede, slowing to a walk and grabbing her gut to conceal the wound there. They blended into the crowd as best they could, herded across 50th. There were more people here, milling on the sidewalk, filming the scene with their cell phones. Incredibly, some of them were laughing. Only in New York. Pan felt like laughing too, like opening her mouth and howling until she was empty, until her lungs stopped working. She clamped her teeth shut, trying to hold it inside, trying to hold everything inside, knowing that if she started screaming now, she would never, ever stop. Where do we go? Said Knight. Oh, God, what do we do now? Nothing. Patrick was right. It was game over. At least the others would have their contracts cancelled. At least their souls were safe. She looked at her watch again. 649 hours, and they'd come for her. This way, said Truck, leading them over towards Broadway. 2 cop cars blasted east, heading to the cathedral, but neither of them stopped. Another helicopter was hovering overhead, this one higher, out of harm's way. They were halfway down the street before Pan remembered to take a breath. It was as if the air were on fire, her chest burning. She collapsed against Marlowe and he lowered her down onto the wall of a flower bed. He was struggling to breathe too, snatching in small, noisy gulps of air. He looked like death, like he was the one who'd been dragged to hell. Oh, we've got to find Ostheim. He'll know what to do, said Knight, pacing back and forth. Ostheim, he'd probably kill her on the spot when he found out what happened. But Knight was right. It was the only thing they could do, and fast, because if the Circle really did have both of the engines, then it would only be a matter of time before they found a way of uniting them, opening the gates permanently. Then the whole world would look like Midtown Manhattan, drowning in blood and fire. First things first, Pan said. We need to get off the island. Truck? On it, he said, lumbering across the street to a parked car and punching through the window. I'm sorry, Pan, said Marlowe, clawing in another breath. I had no idea. He was my friend. Marlowe, just shut your mouth until we figure out what happened. The Lincoln's engine gummed to life as Truck hotwired it. Pan stood, shakily, not wanting Marlowe's help, but pretty sure she wouldn't be able to cross the street without it. Together they clambered into the back of the car, Marlowe slamming the door behind them. Truck floored it, the car accelerating smoothly up 6th Avenue, hooking west on 51st. Truck honked and ground his way through traffic across town to 9th Avenue. They swung left, heading downtown to the Lincoln Tunnel. Pan spotted an old payphone on the corner and leaned forward, slapping Truck's arm. Just pull over a sec. He did. and she climbed out, grunting against the pain. She dialed the operator, giving her name and asking for a collect call to a cell phone in Europe, a number she knew by heart. The phone rang, and rang, and rang. Oh, please, Herc. Please pick up. Please be alive. Do you want me to continue? Asked the operator. Yes, Pan snapped. Ring, ring, ring. Oh, he's dead. He's dead. Oh, this better be you, Pan. Herc's voice was like a golden ray of light cutting through the night. It cracked the floodgates, and Pan broke down, sobbing, just so relieved to hear him, so relieved. Pan? I have a collect call from Pan in New York City, said the operator. Do you accept that? Yes, damn it, piss off, growled Herc. Pan, Jesus, I thought you were dead. What's going on, she said, barely able to fit the words past her choking sobs. The engine. It's gone, he said. The bastard's had a Trojan horse, Charlie. He must have dealt for something immense when he used the engine, because we couldn't stop him, none of us. He opened the door, and Maman was there. We couldn't fight them, not without you. It was a lure, Pan said, wiping her eyes. Patrick baited us away so we couldn't fight it. Jesus, Herc, how do we miss this? Are you guys okay, he asked. Any casualties? We made it, she said. Patrick's dead. Brianna too, again. Where are you? I got out, he said. Just. It was chaos. They're dead, Pan. Who? All of them. Bully, Hope, the lawyers. Maman butchered them. I think Hanson made it out, but I lost him. Oh, God. She had to cling onto the phone to stop herself collapsing. Her body was shaking. No. I can't get hold of Ostheim, he said. And they're after me, Pan. Where are you? I don't know. The red door spat me out somewhere. I didn't have time to see where. A car drove past, full of guys, huge beats blasting from the stereo. Herc, she said quietly. They've got both engines. They're going to unlock the gates. We can stop them, he said, although his words sounded hollow. We've got time, Pam. She checked her watch, those digits counting down relentlessly, plunging towards 0. Actually, she said, I don't. He grunted, a noise that might have been a sob. She heard the sound of his feet pounding, then the click of a door, and when he spoke again, his voice was a whisper. I've got to go, Pam. Get out of the country. Head back to Europe, if you can. I'll get hold of Ostheim. We'll figure out what to do. Shouts from the other end of the phone, a pop that might have been a gunshot. I've got to run, Herc said. Pan, be okay. Just be okay. Then he was gone. She stood there for a moment, listening to the static on the line, wishing she could reach through and grab him, drag him into New York. Be safe, she thought. Then she replaced the phone in the cradle and turned back to the car. Truck, Knight and Marlowe were leaning against it, all of them watching her. That sounded like bad news, said Knight. She opened her mouth to lie to them, to tell them it would be okay. But the sobs were like caged birds finally being set free. She couldn't stop them. She wasn't sure who it was who carried her back to the car, who sat with her in their arms. She just leaned into them and cried, hugging them with everything she had, her body no longer hers, but a broken machine that heaved and sobbed and shook as they drove out of Manhattan. Oh, it's all gone wrong. Last chapter. Better the devil you know. The stone he sat on was cold and uncomfortable, slick with algae. A few bright stars burned through the permanent smog of light that hung over New York. Even though it was summer, the air had cooled. The truth was, though, that Marlowe had never felt more relieved to be anywhere in his life. Compared to the molten heat of a soul being dragged to hell, cold was good, and he was just grateful that he could still feel anything at all. After the day he'd had, that was no small mercy. But the relief was short-lived. He couldn't believe what had happened, what he'd done. It couldn't have been Charlie. Surely he wouldn't have done that in a million years. Not unless they got to him. Not unless they forced him. He shivered, chewing his knuckles for a split second before the taste of blood and dirt made him spit. They were sitting by a small wooded lake somewhere west of New York, somewhere quiet. Truck had driven them through the Lincoln Tunnel and then gunned it for Pennsylvania, although Marlowe had no idea where they were now. Truck and Knight were off scouting for another car, better safe than sorry. The blast doors had slammed down over Manhattan and the surrounding boroughs. Homeland out in force. They'd listened to the radio on the way down. It had been full of terror, a series of coordinated attacks on St. Patrick's, on the Rock Centre, on Staten Island. Everybody was shouting terrorists. Even witnesses to the scene spoke of bombs exploding, gun battles in the street. Nobody mentioned demons or people with superpowers. No, it was much easier to believe in a convincing lie than an impossible truth. Better the devil you know. Pan sat. She definitely didn't shat. Pan sat a short distance away, lobbing stones into the unsettled water. Even in the bruised dark, he could see how broken she was. The physical wounds were clear enough. Her body was wrapped tight in linen bandages that Knight had looted from a drugstore downtown, but blood still seeped through her chest and stomach, turning her into a Rorschach inkblot. Marlowe kept staring at it, wondering what it would tell him about himself. Nothing he didn't already know, he suspected. It was the mental wounds that were most obvious, though. Before today, Marlowe had thought Pan's emotional core had been iced over, her tear ducts frozen shut. But she'd wept for the whole journey, over an hour, her racking cries softening to quiet soft sobs, then hitched, whimpering breaths. Although she was quiet now, her face was deeply lined and she chewed her nails like she hadn't eaten in a month. Every other second she checked her watch, and Marlowe knew what she was thinking. The demons were coming for her, and there was absolutely nothing she could do about it. He had injuries of his own, too. His chest radiated pain, and he was drenched in blood. How much of it was his, though, and how much belonged to other people? He had no idea. Still, what was it people said? Scars were just proof that you were stronger than whatever tried to kill you. Pan sniffed, her chattering teeth the loudest thing in the night. Marlowe stood up, then lost heart and sat down. Then stood up again, stumbling over the loose shingle and sitting next to her. He had no jacket, but he pressed himself against her, putting an arm around her shoulder. Smooth Marlowe, he thought. She pushed him away, almost hard enough to knock him off the rock. Sorry, you sounded cold, he said, knowing full well that the night had nothing to do with it. These were the shakes you got when life sucker punched you. I could be sitting naked in the Arctic, and I still wouldn't want you near me, she said, hugging herself. You did this. I'll never forgive you. I didn't, he said, the guilt like a knife sliding into his stomach. I didn't know, Pan. I don't get why he did it. Charlie. It was still impossible to understand what had happened. The circle must have brainwashed him, used some kind of mind control. It was the only explanation, right? And he saw Charlie lying on the ground near fresh kills, injected with alcohol, pleading with Marlowe to bring him. And he didn't. So Pam was right. This was his fault. I'm sorry, Charlie, he thought, wrapping his arms around himself, against the tremors that rocked his own body, against the night, against the world. What happens now? Marlowe said. We find it, right? We find our engine and we take it back. Pan shook her head. It's impossible, Marlowe. We'll never find it. They found ours, he said. It can be done. If I can just get hold of Charlie, if I can just speak to him. Don't you think you've done enough damage? She spat at him. They're dead because of you. I'm dead too. He swallowed down his reply alongside a mouthful of bile. He coughed, his airways still held open by the engine. Not for long, though. Once the Circle had cancelled his contract, the asthma would be back, and somehow he knew it would be worse than ever, the way a cell seems smaller to a prisoner who's escaped for a little while. The monster would have its claws well and truly around his throat again. I want to help, he said. I need to. I know Charlie. I know he wouldn't do this unless he was forced to. I can find him, Pan. Pan reached down and grabbed another stone, but instead of throwing it, she held onto it, looking at it like it was engraved with the answer to everything. Did he say anything to you? She asked. Charlie, no, nothing. Wait, he thought back. He did though, didn't he? Charlie in the infirmary bed, the last words he'd whispered. They're lying to you. No, he said again, the word surprising him. He wasn't sure why he was keeping it to himself. Look, how long do we have before the engines are united? I don't know, Pam replied. Nobody's ever done it before. Nobody really knows how it works. So that's a good thing, right? He said. They might not figure it out. They will, Pan said. It's Mammon. He'll figure it out. Then we find him before he does. Marlowe said. I promise you, Pan, it will be okay. Okay, she said, spitting out a bitter laugh. It's over. Everything is finished. You've seen it when you were in the machine. You've seen him. Marlowe could see him now, a mess of rot and decay who watched the world with insect eyes. Something so horrific that he made the worm bag look as harmless as a hamster. He could almost sense that longing, the desire to be unleashed. Whatever was down there, devil or not, it wanted to be free. And what then? Marlowe thought of Staten Island, pictured his mum at home with the dog, saw his neighbours, his classmates, saw them trying to fight the demons when they tore through. It was too much, and he had to force the image from his mind before he drowned in blood. "He's there, Marlowe," Pan said. "He'll take us all." This time, when he put his hand around Pan's shoulders and pulled her close, she didn't resist. He held her tight until the soft purr of an engine rose up behind them. Marlowe turned to see an SUV trundling down the path, its lights off. It pulled up, and Truck rolled down the window, leaning out. He looked tired, but he was doing his best to smile. "You two want to get a room?" he said. Pan grumbled something under her breath and pushed herself up. Truck beamed. "It's no trouble. There's a Motel 6 up the street." "Oh, shut it, you perv," Pan said as they walked to the car. But Marlowe thought he saw a glimmer of a smile there too. That was the weird thing about life, he thought. No matter how bad the injury was, laughter could fix it. It had powers of its own, laughter. An engine of a different kind. "You know where we're going?" Marlowe said. "There's a private airfield outside Bethlehem, Pennsylvania," Pan replied. "We'll head to Europe. We find Herc and Ostheim." "And then what?" Knight asked. She was curled up in the passenger seat, like a bird in its nest. "And then we take back the engine," Marlowe said. "We take ours and we take theirs and we end this war for good." You're forgetting something," said Truck. Marlowe paused, then nodded. "Yeah, we crushed some serious ass." "My man," said Truck with a fist bump. Marlowe waited for Pan to climb in the back, taking one last look out across the lake. For a moment he thought he saw a silhouette against the water, a blurred shape against the drifting dark. For some reason he thought of his brother, long dead, and his stomach looped. In his tired mind's eye, Danny lifted a hand in salute. Marlowe smiled, feeling the prickle of tears in his eyes. He saluted back, but the illusion had gone. The water, just water, full of night. "I miss you, bro," he said. "I wish you were here." "Yeah, right," Danny replied in his head. "Chasing the devil while demons try to devour my ass. Sure, Marley, I'd love to be there." And Marlowe was laughing to himself as he climbed into the car. He slammed the door shut behind him. "I'm glad someone finds this funny," said Pam. She was glaring at him from the other side of the car, but it somehow made her look even more attractive. That was one good thing, he supposed. At least he got to spend a little more time with her. She may have hated his guts, but surely the thought of being dragged to hell in 25 days or so would make any girl lower her standards. "I just know we can do this," he said. "I think things will be okay." "I wish I shared your optimism," said Truck, putting the car in drive and rumbling slowly out of the park. 4 of us, 3 without powers, once the Circle cancels our contracts, against 2 engines. "They'll be recruiting more engineers too," said Pan. "They'll be gunning for us." "And Mormon will be there," added Knight. "Maybe another worm bag or 2. "And the demons," said Truck, turning left onto the deserted parkway. "Don't forget the demons." "So the 4 of us against all the armies of hell," said Marlowe, nodding. Why wouldn't we be optimistic?" Pan leaned over and thumped him on the shoulder, but she was smiling now, the sight of it like the first golden rays of dawn peeking over the horizon. Smiling and laughing, all of them laughing, like birdsong, as they drove into the night. So, that sets it up quite nicely for Book 2, Hellfighters. Will Marlowe and Pan be able to stop the Circle from raising hell on Earth before their time is up? And the original tagline on the next book was "The Hellacious Journey of an Unlikely Warrior," which I don't think they kept. I can't be bothered to stand up, but yeah, that would have been so cool if they had. "The Hellacious Journey of an Unlikely Warrior." I hope you enjoyed that. That was the first book in the Devil's Engine series. I love it. I love that book. It's just, when I sit down to read a book, that's kind of exactly what I want. Bit of banter, lots of friendship, lots of danger, lots of gore, some nightmare fuel, loads of action, and just fun, you know? That's what I love when I read a book. I want fun. So I'll be back at some point very soon to start the Devil's Engine Hell Fighters. And yeah, we'll see how Marlowe and Pan and the others get on. Anyway, I hope you had fun listening to that, and I hope you're having a lovely day, whatever you're doing. Be kind to yourselves, be kind to each other, and yeah, I'll see you very soon. And let's crush some serious ass. Bye.